This is Shalom World Podcast.
Welcome to Voyage. I am your host, Frances Hogan. Welcome to our reflection on St. John's Gospel, and we continue with our reflection on chapter 13. We're coming towards the end of chapter 13 now, and I want to pick up in verse 32. At the end of verse 30, that night had fallen, and therefore this terrible hour of Jesus' death is coming upon us. But Jesus' reaction is very interesting. He says in verse 31, "Now the hour has come. Now has the Son of Man been glorified, and in him God has been glorified." Now, the word glorified means fully manifested. And John is going to show us, as we go through this text, that every single thing we know about Jesus is going to be publicly manifested during all the events of the Passion in a most extraordinary manner. Okay. So the hour has come. It looks like Satan's hour because Judas has gone out to betray Jesus. But in actual fact, it's God's kairos time, God's chosen time for intervention in human affairs to bring about the redemption of the world. It's the time when love is going to conquer hatred and life will conquer death. We're going to find now that Jesus immediately begins his final discourse at the end of this chapter, and he waited until Judas had left. He waited until the darkness had left and only love was left in the room. So with Judas leaving, hatred and rejection has left. And we now have a beautiful atmosphere of those who love one another. And Jesus is surrounded by love, and he begins to not just reveal himself, he begins to reveal who they are and who they're going to be. In other words, we have the most extraordinary revelation of the reality and the mystery of the church given to us here. So distress has left the room because Judas has left. And when Jesus leaves this room at the end of the farewell discourse, he will go out into the darkness of Gethsemane, and light will be confronted by darkness, and the great clash of the titans will actually take place. And light goes into the darkness, and the darkness thinks it can overcome the light, but it actually can't. John told us in chapter 1, verse 5, that Jesus is a light that shines in the darkness, a light that the darkness cannot overpower. He also tells us in chapter 1, verse 9, that the Word is the true light that enlightens all people. And so it is actually these extraordinary events that are going to enlighten us as to who Jesus really is and who we are in him. So this long night has fallen. This long night, it has already begun, and is a long night not only for Jesus, for the disciples, but for all humanity. It will have a wonderful dawn on the third day, the first day of the new era, the day that we will call Easter Sunday, God's own day. Okay, but first things first, let's deal with what the issue is. The issue is love. In this new community of the beloved disciples, the issue is love. Let's read it. Jesus addresses a company of men, some of whom, like Peter, are older than himself, and he says, "My little children, I shall not be with you much longer. You will look for me, and as I told the Jews," that means the Jewish leaders, "where I am going, you cannot come," because Jesus is going into death and into resurrection. "I give you a new commandment." In Latin, of course, that's mandatum, and that's why Holy Thursday is called Maundy Thursday. "I give you a new commandment, love one another just as I have loved you." Now, love one another by itself is one thing, but to love one another as Jesus loved us is a different matter altogether. And so that's going to be explained to us. You are to love one another just as I have loved you. So, in the same way, you must love each other. By this love, that means that among us there will be God's divine love, his agape love. By this love, he said, that you have for one another, everyone will know that you're my disciples. So this is going to be the distinguishing mark of the church. Everybody will recognize this particular community. So let's look at this. So the atmosphere completely changes once Judas leaves. And the extraordinary thing is that tension goes out and love comes in. And they are all unified. Now, Jesus calls them little children for several reasons. The Synoptic Gospels tells us that all of us are the brothers and sisters of Jesus in this new family that is the church, and he is the father of this family. We are little children in terms of spirituality, that we have not grown to become great saints yet, and also that the Passover was celebrated in the context of family, and the head, Jesus is the head, was called the father of the family, and all the other participants, no matter who they were, are called the children of the family. So he can call them his children from many different angles. Many commentators have spoken about the final discourse of Jesus, and they tell us that it surpasses in nobility and majesty anything that you can read anywhere else. And also anything that you can read even also in the ministry of Jesus, because when Jesus gave his discourses in the first half of the gospel, very often it was to hostile audiences. And so the wonder and glory of his divine love couldn't shine as clearly as it shines here. It shines here so brightly that you almost become blinded by it. And so this particular one is very bright because Jesus is speaking to his own. He's speaking to the beloved disciples. He's speaking to the ones who, in spite of their weaknesses and in spite of all that will happen in the next 24 hours, that they will come back. They will be restored to him, and they will be the men who will take this message to the ends of the earth. So we have to realize from the very beginning that the discourse of Jesus is on the level of above. It's absolutely ages away from the level of below. And if you are not reading it on the level of above, you just won't get what is being said at all. I'll do my best to give it to you on the level of above. And as you begin to hear the final discourse coming from Jesus, you realize that he's speaking in time, in other words, to the 12, and he's speaking in a timelessness as well, out of time, because he is speaking to all generations of his beloved disciples to the very end of time. And also when John wrote this text, Jesus was already in heaven. And so he's with us and he's in heaven at the same time. So we are being drawn up onto this higher level in a very special way. We're at the Last Supper, but we're also in heaven, and we have this strange feeling of being pulled up to this very high place. As Jesus begins to give us his final discourse, he is beginning to let go of the limitations of time and to lay down his life and to enter into the timelessness of the resurrection. He's already prepared us for this. In chapter 12, verse 24, Jesus said, "Unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single grain. But if it dies, it will produce a rich harvest." So now the time has come for the grain to die. The challenge which Jesus gives to the apostles, and to us, of course, is that we must learn how to live this heavenly life on earth and to become icons of Jesus as he was an icon of the Father. But we've got to live it in the midst of the unbelieving world, which is actually quite difficult. But we will live it as his ambassadors. That is 2 Corinthians 5:20. It's all about love. Everything in the kingdom of God is about love. Everything in our relationship with Jesus is about love. The great issue is love. Okay, so the new Christian lifestyle that Jesus is going to describe is love. And he's going to give it to us from chapter 13 now, right to chapter 17. And so he says, I give you a new commandment, but they already knew they should love one another. The bit that's completely new is that you're to love one another in the same way as I've loved you. That's completely new. Because when you go back to the Old Covenant, the covenant of Moses, and you go back to Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 to 10, the Shema Israel, you hear that God has the right to demand exclusive love from the people he has redeemed. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one Lord, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with your entire being. Exclusive love given totally and completely to God. They were also asked to give love to their Israelite neighbours and to anybody who might be living among them as strangers. Okay, so it was very limited. In other words, there were other nations you could hate. Jesus is going to be completely different to that. He raises the level so high that there is no one you can hate, no one at all. You must love everyone. And love isn't a feeling. Love isn't an emotion. Love isn't a passion. This love is a decision in our innermost being to give ourselves to God and to others. And so the essence of the Christian life is love, and he's going to give it to us very graphically in John 15:9. So this one command of Jesus replaces the 10 commands of Moses. Now, why does one replace 10? Well, if you go to St. Matthew's Gospel, chapter 22, verses 37 to 40, Jesus was asked what is the greatest commandment of the law. And out of all the 10 commandments, he chose, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your being, and you shall love your neighbour as yourself. And then he added something. He said, on this hangs the whole law and the prophets. Now, the expression that something hangs on was used by the rabbis in all their discussions. They would say that such and such a principle hangs on such and such a text. And Jesus says the entire Bible hangs on the law of love because God is love. This is the essence of everything. This is the center. So if you have no love, we are not in at all. We're just not there. Why is Jesus going to speak about a very special kind of love? Because he's sending these ordinary human beings who have their faults and failings like everybody else. He's sending them out into an unbelieving world full of hatred and full of all that's wrong in the world of unbelief and sin, and they have to transform it. Now, they can't transform it with human love. It's not possible. The only way you can transform the cosmos out there is with divine love. And this is this unconditional, self-sacrificing, self-giving love, in which you don't ask for thanks. You don't ask for a response. It's the sheer privilege of loving this way, loving like Jesus. And that's what's going to bring about the transformation of the world. And this is going to be the hallmark of the existence of the church, because this kind of love is not out there in the cosmos. They know nothing about it. And it is a total amazement for them that somebody would give without looking for anything in return. And so it is this totally self-sacrificing love that the Lord wants for his church. Now, in the Old Covenant, they celebrated the glories of the first Exodus and the first Passover. But from here on in, it will be the glories of Jesus' Passover that are actually going to be celebrated by the church for all time, because Jesus is going to give us a new covenant that will be signed in his own blood. St. Luke tells us that in chapter 22:20. And as well as that, you need to understand that what Jesus is going to tell us here in the final discourse is the fulfillment of what Jeremiah told us in chapter 31, verses 31 to 34, in which he promised that everybody would know God personally and they would be taught by God. In this room, everybody is not only knowing God personally, God is personally present to them in Jesus, and they all have this extraordinary relationship with him, and he is offering them everything that he was given himself for his mission. His generosity in sharing everything with them is just totally extraordinary. These disciples are going to discover that the way that love was lived in the past was very human, very limited, because you could love your friends and hate your enemies. And Jesus says, no, that's not the way any longer. The thing that you have got to treat everybody, friend and foe, as a friend. You've got to love your enemies. You've got to do good to those who hate you and bless those who curse you, and so on. And so it's going to be completely different. But if we're to love like Jesus, we have to understand that you love the other person knowing their faults and failings. You love them with a love that's laced with forgiveness. That's the way it is for human beings. Because as long as we're on the planet, we're faulty human beings. Okay. So let me just finish by talking about the final shock that you get in chapter 13. Don't you think we've had enough? There's one more. Simon Peter speaks up. This is verse 36 to 38. Lord, where are you going? And Jesus said, where I'm going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow me later. Peter said to him, why can't I follow you now? Like a child, saying to the parent, why can't I come with you? I would lay down my life for you. And Jesus said, lay down your life for me? He said, I tell you most solemnly, before the cock crows, you will have denied me 3 times. There's not a sound out of the other 10. Not a sound. They must have been totally shocked. Surely it was bad enough to hear about Judas, and now they hear that Peter is going to deny the Lord as well. This is the terribly important thing. Peter is still on the level of below. He thinks that he should be able to go wherever Jesus goes, that he should be able to physically accompany him. He's not hearing that Jesus is speaking on a different plane altogether. For Peter, he doesn't grasp that there's a particular journey that only Jesus can take, that Jesus has got to go alone into his passion, unaccompanied by anyone, and all alone by himself, nobody helping him, he will save the world by his own love. And Peter won't have added anything to it. Peter's got to learn some things. But there are some lessons I want to give you before I finish. And that is, Peter has to learn a few lessons, and it is good if we learn them as well. And that is, what does following Jesus mean? We're going to see that when Jesus is put under trial, that Peter is following him, but following him in the wrong way. Okay. Following Jesus does not mean something physical. That's what Peter is saying. Why can't I follow you now? It's spiritual. Following Jesus is spiritual. To follow Jesus, we've got to imbibe his word. We've got to internalize it. We've got to make it our own. We've got to feed on the Eucharist. That's John chapter 6. We've got to leave the cosmos, the unbelieving world. We've got to leave them. And we have got to put ourselves in a position in which we're in the kingdom of God. We're not following the principles of the world. And so it's hard for us to be in the world and not of it. We have to leave our own egocentric self. We've got to let that go. We've got to let it die. And we've got to get divine love be born in us. And so we have to die to self and rise to a spiritual life. We will be tested just as Peter was tested. Okay? And I hope we don't fail as much as Peter failed on this very first occasion. Only Jesus can lift us up to that level where we can actually glorify God in our lives. Okay. Peter has to learn what you and I have to learn as well, and that is that if we're going to follow Jesus, you will be continuously in battle. First of all, you will be in battle with yourself. Secondly, you will be in battle with Satan, who won't want you to get to the top of the mountain. And thirdly, you'll be in battle with the world, which thinks you're crazy. The world doesn't know where you're going. It doesn't even know where it's going itself. Thank you for joining us. Slán agus banach dé live. Goodbye. God bless you.
Thank you for joining us today. We'd like to hear what you thought of today's session. Share your feedback with us at podcast@shalomworld.org. You can motivate and support us today. shalomworld.org/donate. Visit shalomworld.org for more information about Shalom World Podcasts. To get the latest updates, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Shalom World Podcasts. Shalom World Podcasts is now available on all online platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others.